Hello and welcome to tonight's literary music series performance. I'm Rūta and I'm very honored to be here among so many amazing musicians and people on such a spectacular program. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time with me. I'll be sharing with you the music of Bach, Ravel, and John Adams, and I'll be reading excerpts from Proust, a poem by M.S. Merwin, a poem by Paul Celan, and a few of my own poems. The theme that I've chosen is Vessels of Remembrance, partly due to the Ravel, which is the Tombeau de Couperin. I'll be playing excerpts from that, in which each movement is dedicated to a friend of Ravel's. But mostly I wanted to explore how all of these works tie together the idea that art oftentimes can function as this vessel for remembering someone, something, a place. Remembrance and honoring of something from our past has a lot to do with memory as well, and art has a way of containing that into something that's tangible or able to be experienced in the moment, bringing the past into the present. And sometimes the way that it's brought into our present gives us another way of honoring whatever it was that it was honoring in the first place. I'd like to begin with a poem by M.S. Merwin titled Separation. It's one of my favorite short poems. Separation. Your absence has gone through me like thread through a needle. Everything I do is stitched with its color. So, moving right on to Proust, although I have yet to read a full novel or the entire volume, which I plan to do at some point, I do know that Proust deals a lot with the idea of involuntary memory, which is that moment in which a specific sensory experience triggers an entire series of flashbacks and sort of brings you back into the moment in which you experience that specific thing. And you'll hear that in this excerpt, and I think you'll get a better idea of what I mean. But in other words, you can't control what this memory brings, and it's hard to actively bring it out of yourself without that specific sensory experience triggering that memory. I didn't leave anything out of this excerpt, so forgive me, it's a little bit long, but I hope you enjoy it. I find the Celtic belief very reasonable that the souls of those we have lost are held captive in some inferior creature, in an animal, in a plant, in some inanimate object, effectively lost to us until the day, which for many never comes, when we happen to pass close to the tree, come into possession of the object that is their prison. Then they quiver, they call out to us, and as soon as we have recognized them, the spell is broken. Delivered by us, they have overcome death, and they return to live with us. It is the same with our past. It is a waste of effort for us to try to summon it. All the exertions of our intelligence are useless. The past is hidden outside the realm of our intelligence and beyond its reach, in some material object, in the sensation that this material object would give us, which we do not suspect. It depends on chance whether we encounter this object before we die or do not encounter it. For many years already, everything about Cambrai that was not the theater and drama of my bedtime had ceased to exist for me, when one day in winter, as I returned home, my mother, seeing that I was cold, suggested that, contrary to my habit, I have a little tea. I refused at first, and then, I do not know why, changed my mind. She sent for one of those squat, plump cakes called petites madeleines that look as though they have been molded in the grooved valve of a scallop shell. And soon, mechanically, oppressed by the gloomy day and the prospect of another sad day to follow, I carried to my lips a spoonful of the tea in which I had let soften a bit of madeleine. But at the very instant when the mouthful of tea mixed with cake crumbs touched my palate, I quivered, attentive to the extraordinary thing that was happening inside me. A delicious pleasure had invaded me, isolated me, without my having any notion as to its cause. It had immediately rendered the vicissitudes of life unimportant to me, its disasters innocuous, its brevity illusory, acting in the same way that love acts, filling me with a precious essence, or rather, this essence was not merely inside me, it was me. I had ceased to feel more mediocre, contingent, mortal. Where could it have come to me from, this powerful joy? I sensed that it was connected to the taste of the tea and the cake, but that it went infinitely far beyond it, could not be of the same nature. Where did it come from? What did it mean? How could I grasp it? I drink a second mouthful, in which I find nothing more than in the first, a third that gives me a little less than the second. It is time for me to stop. The virtue of the drink seems to be diminishing. Clearly, the truth I am seeking is not in the drink, but in me. The drink has awoken it in me, but does not know this truth, and can do no more than repeat indefinitely, with less and less force, the same testimony, which I do not know how to interpret, and which I want at least to be able to ask of it again and find again, intact, available to me, soon for a decisive clarification. I put down the cup and turn to my mind. It is up to my mind to find the truth. But how? Such grave uncertainty whenever the mind feels overtaken by itself, when it, the seeker, is also the obscure country where it must seek, and where all its baggage will be nothing to it. Seek? Not only that, create. It is face to face with something that does not yet exist, and that only it can accomplish, then bring into its light. And I begin asking myself again what it could be, this unknown state which brought with it no logical proof, but only the evidence of its felicity, its reality, and in whose presence the other states of consciousness faded away. I want to try to make it reappear. I return in my thoughts to the moment when I took the first spoonful of tea. I find the same state again, without any new clarity. I ask my mind to make another effort, to bring back once more the sensation that is slipping away, and, so that nothing may interrupt the thrust with which it will try to grasp again, I clear away every obstacle, every foreign idea. I protect my ears and my attention from the noises in the next room. But feeling my mind grow tired without succeeding, I now compel it to accept the very distraction I was denying it, to think of something else, to recover its strength before a supreme attempt. Then for a second time I create an empty space before it. I confront it again with the still recent taste of that first mouthful, and I feel something quiver in me, shift, try to rise, something that seems to have been unanchored at a great depth. I do not know what it is, but it comes up slowly. I feel the resistance, and I hear the murmur of the distances traversed. Undoubtedly, what is palpitating thus deep inside me must be the image, the visual memory which is attached to this taste and is trying to follow it to me. But it is struggling too far away, too confusedly. I can just barely perceive the neutral glimmer in which the elusive eddying of stirred-up colors is blended, but I cannot distinguish the form, cannot ask it, as the one possible interpreter, to translate for me the evidence of its contemporary, its inseparable companion, the taste. Ask it to tell me what particular circumstances involved, what period of the past. Will it reach the clear surface of my consciousness, this memory, this old moment which the attraction of an identical moment has come from so far to invite, to move, to raise up from the deepest part of me? I don't know. Now I no longer feel anything. It has stopped, gone back down perhaps. Who knows if it will ever rise up from its darkness again? 10 times I must begin again, lean down toward it, and each time the laziness that deters us from every difficult task, every work of importance, has counseled me to leave it, to drink my tea, and think only about my worries of today, my desires for tomorrow, upon which I may ruminate effortlessly. and suddenly the memory appeared. That taste was the taste of the little piece of Madeleine, which on Sunday mornings at Cambrai, because that day I did not go out before it was time for Mass, when I went to say good morning to her in her bedroom, my Aunt Leonie would give me, after dipping it in her infusion of tea or lime blossom. The sight of the little Madeleine had not reminded me of anything before I tasted it, perhaps because I had often seen them since, without eating them, on the shelves of the pastry shops, and their image had therefore left those days of Cambrai and attached itself to others more recent. Perhaps because of these recollections abandoned so long outside my memory, nothing survived, everything had come apart. The forms and the form, too, of the little shell made of cake, so fatly sensual with its severe and pious pleading, had been destroyed, or, still half asleep, had lost to the force of expansion that would have allowed them to rejoin my consciousness. But, when nothing subsists of an old past, after the death of people, after the destruction of things, alone, frailer but more enduring, more immaterial, more persistent, more faithful, smell and taste still remain for a long time, like souls, remembering, waiting, hoping, upon the ruins of all the rest, bearing without giving way, on their almost impalpable droplet, the immense edifice of memory. And as soon as I had recognized the taste of the piece of Madeleine dipped in lime blossom tea that my aunt used to give me, though I did not yet know and had to put off to much later discovering why this memory made me so happy, immediately the old gray house on the street, where her bedroom was, came like a stage set to attach itself to the little wing opening onto the garden that had been built for my parents behind it, that truncated section which was all I had seen before then. And with the house, the town, from morning to night and in all weathers, the square where they sent me before lunch, the streets where I went on errands, the paths we took if the weather was fine. And as in that game enjoyed by the Japanese in which they fill a porcelain bowl with water and steep in it little pieces of paper until then indistinct, which, the moment they are immersed, stretch and twist, assume colors and distinctive shapes, become flowers, houses, human figures, firm and recognizable, so now all the flowers in our garden and in Mr. Swan's park, and the water lilies of the Vivant, and the good people of the village and their little dwellings, and the church and all of Cambrai and its surroundings, all of this which is acquiring form and solidity, emerged, town and gardens alike, from my cup of tea. So the music that I've played and listened to throughout my life often has this effect on me, this effect of involuntary memory, which is why I chose to include the aria from the Goldberg Variations by J.S. Bach. The aria in particular has a significance to my understanding of memory and remembrance in that if you don't know, the Goldberg Variations are, they have the theme, which is the aria, and then 30 variations, and then at the very end of this variation cycle, the aria from the beginning is repeated again. And in my mind, hearing the aria for the first time, it's sort of like on a clean slate, right? I mean, we've all heard the Goldbergs a million times, but say you're listening to it for the first time. It's a clean slate, and then you hear it go through all of these variations and these different forms and existences, and then once it's repeated at the end, it's almost as if you hear your memory of everything that's occurred and happened to it before that repetition. You hear it in the skeleton of the aria that you heard at the beginning. And it's very interesting how change and repetition affect our memory, affect our remembrance of someone, and the ways in which we choose to remember. So Bach particularly has this involuntary memory aspect for me because I started playing Bach at a very, very young age, and when I would spend long summers and winters at my grandparents' house in Salt Lake City, Utah, we would rent an upright piano sometimes so that I could practice, and I have these very vivid involuntary memories that come up when I practice Bach, in which I almost, remember the texture of the carpet and the smell of the candles in the room, and what my grandma was wearing when she came downstairs, and like the cups that I was drinking tea for, like all these things. I'm projecting Proust into this, but but Bach has that effect on me. So without further ado, the aria from the Goldberg Variations. So next we'll be hearing a few excerpts from Ravel's Le Tombeau de Couperin. Ravel began working on this piece in 1914, and around that time he made several attempts to enlist in the army and join the war efforts, but was denied multiple times because of a minor heart condition and his stature or age. Everywhere says something different, but eventually he was able to as a driver, and obviously throughout his time there he met and lost many friends. So when he completed this suite, Le Tombeau de Couperin, in 1917, he ended up dedicating each movement to a friend that he had lost in the war. This dedication that he created was criticized actually for its lightheartedness, but his response was, "The dead are sad enough in their eternal silence." I personally think that Ravel created, again, vessels of remembrance through which the families of those who were lost in the war were able to actually grieve through music and mourn in a way that almost carries their spirit through in a more beautiful, peaceful way. And as most of these movements are dance movements, that says a lot about the quality of that and the beauty of a lighthearted remembrance. Ravel has a personal connection to my own life in the way that I have, the experiences that I've had while I was working on or, listening to a lot of Ravel. I actually learned Le Tombeau de Couperin in high school, but at that time I wasn't totally aware of how Ravel constructs his compositions and the complete depth to which that can go when you analyze it. He actually constructs pieces in a similar way, I think, to Proust's novel, In Search of Lost Time, in that he implements these moments of memory, and everything is threaded together and interconnected in such a intentional and immensely intricate way. So when I started working on sonatine a while ago, that actually coincided with my grandpa being diagnosed with cancer, and sonatine was actually the first piece that I really paid attention to in the way that it was constructed, and I spent time looking at what Ravel was doing with the music and just kind of seeing the patterns and the connections and this interval appears here and is connected to here, and I started seeing that in every other Ravel piece that I loved, and I was just blown away. It almost overwhelmed me because of how immense this web was that he creates. But in terms of sonatine and my grandpa and how that connected to my remembrance of him, I actually made a recording of sonatine last summer before I visited him in the hospital for the last time, and I played the recording for him through my headphones so that he could hear it above the oxygen tank, and that was obviously a very strange experience for me, just realizing that I wouldn't ever be able to play it for him in person again, but at least I'm glad that it was Ravel. So this past summer, the infamous summer of 2020, the linden trees in our neighborhood were blossoming effusively, and I had a very similar experience to Marcel in the excerpt from Proust that I read in which he saw the madeleines in the shop, but they never triggered anything special because, he didn't associate the image of the madeleine with all of these memories that he had been storing. And my grandparents had a linden tree in their backyard when I was growing up, and we spent many long summers there, and every summer it would blossom and bloom, and we'd pick the blossoms and dry them to make linden tea. And that process, the smell, the taste of the tea, everything was so deeply rooted in my childhood, and it was something that was just ever present in my relationship with my grandparents, even until my grandpa's last year. They would even mail me linden blossoms to make tea with. So I started realizing what these trees were that were blooming, and that smell, it kept triggering in me all these memories. So I wrote a poem in memory of my grandpa about the linden trees. Linden Blossom Tea. If you were here, I'd call you just to tell you of the linden trees asleep like holy temples in our neighborhood. If you were here, I'd tell you how I thought of you, of Grandma and the ancient linden deity of your backyard, how it shaded us through summer after summer. If you were still here, I'd say, remember? How after breakfast, while Grandma begged us sisters not to fuss about the sun hats, you'd set a ladder underneath the tree, and we'd ascend the rungs beneath the starry blossoms of her arms, too young to be preoccupied with falling, plastic buckets dangling from one hand, careful of the bees, and making sure to pick entire stems, and making sure that even if my memory will fail me once my childhood has resigned itself to something of a long archival daydream, I would ensure my breaths were fuller than they'd ever been before, so that at least I will remember this, so that at least I will do everything it takes to hold fast to the fabled presence of this tree, our great protector, scent of honeydew like heaven, and the morning light bestowing X-ray vision of each leaf, and on our tongues the lingering expectancy of linden tea with honey, and somewhere in the distance the echo of your voice calling us home. I also remember that before I flew home after I visited him for the last time, there was, just by chance, a piano at the airport, a grand piano, and I sat down and played sonatine before my flight. So anyway, here are a few excerpts from Le Tombeau de Couperin. So the next poem that I'm going to read is by a poet that I did not know about until recently, and I had kind of a spooky experience because the first time I heard about him, I was reading this essay by Chase Bergrun in the latest poetry magazine about Ceylon's work and the impact it had on his life, and it was beautifully written. I recommend everyone to read that if you get a chance. But for about a week after that, I kept running into Ceylon's work on a daily basis, just randomly out of nowhere. You know, it would just like show up. It's hard to explain, but I ended up becoming really immersed in his work and very curious about it. And actually, he has like the story of his losses in his life are integral to what his work represents and what it was for him and for many, many people. He had tried to convince his parents to flee from Nazi roundups and wasn't able to convince them, and he became really upset and stormed out of the house and spent the night at a friend's house. Came back the next day and the house was completely empty and his parents were nowhere to be found. And it was only years later that the news of their deaths had somehow come back to him. His father passed away from typhus. His mother was shot in the snow because she was deemed unfit to work. So he carried this guilt for his parents' deaths, thinking that if he had gone with them, that he would have prevented that from happening. He chose to write primarily and publish primarily in German, actually I think entirely, but although he spoke many languages, he chose German despite horrible things that were happening. German was not the most beautiful language for anyone, but he took it into his own hands to kind of reconstruct the language in a way that honored his mother's mother tongue, which was German, and it was almost his way of creating vessels to carry his mother's presence through into his life, into you know, everything that we have now also. But I came across a poem. I have a different one here, but I'm going to read the one that I came across yesterday. It's called Epitaph for Françoise. Both doors of the world stand open, opened by you in the twilight. We hear them slam and bear uncertainty, and bear the green into your ever. October 1953. And it's actually the only poem of his that has a date. So before I play China Gates and read my poem, the FedEx guy is here. I'd like to just say thank you once again for being here with me and taking this time to listen and think with me and think about remembrance and things that are kind of hard to think about these days. It's gonna ring the doorbell? No. I think we've had a year of immense grief and loss and, you know, in every possible way almost. So the act of remembrance, the act of using art and words and music to carry us through this, to carry things that we've lost through into the presence with us. It's something I think that's integral to human existence as a whole. I wrote a pantoum a couple weeks ago, just as an experiment, really. I think that's all I can say, besides the fact that Ravel's second movement of his piano trio is also a pantoum, but that's, again, I'll leave that to the musicologists. It has no title. Among the city's sea of hearts that beat, I listen for the echo of your voice. In traffic lights, like blinding fields of wheat, I'm left without a memory of choice. I listen for the echo of your voice. I wonder if you listen for mine there. What's left of me? A memory? A choice? A momentary breath of winter air. I wonder if you listen. Are you there? Your presence is peripheral and true. A momentary breath, a winter air. The earth will always spin me back to you. Your presences, peripheral and true. Swift likenesses in fields of break-light wheat. Still every route I take leads back to you. A sea of hearts seldom forgets to beat.